The gymnasium falls silent as Elijah Carter's body hits the floor with a sickening thud. Blood trickles from his split lip, his white competition uniform now stained crimson. Across from him, the reigning national champion towers with a smirk. 3 seconds remain in the championship match. In the stands, Elijah's father grips his seat knuckles white. Nobody in Westridge High would believe this is the same quiet black student who stood motionless yesterday as steaming coffee soaked through his new school clothes, his eyes betraying nothing. Elijah slowly rises, assuming a stance nobody at his new school has ever seen. The champion's smirk fades as recognition dawns in his eyes. This was no ordinary transfer student. Before we dive into this incredible story about hidden strength and standing up to racism, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience and justice. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated only to be shocked by what they were truly capable of? This story will show you why appearances can be deceiving and how true power often lies beneath the surface. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of foreboding as Elijah Carter stood before the imposing brick facade of Westridge High School, adjusting the strap of his worn backpack. At 15, Elijah had already experienced more loss than most adults, having moved from Chicago to the affluent, predominantly white suburb of Oakwood Heights following his mother's death from cancer 3 months earlier. His father, Marcus Carter, a 44-year-old history professor who had accepted a position at the local university, placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember what we talked about," Marcus said quietly, his eyes reflecting concern behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Keep your head down, focus on your studies, no trouble." Elijah nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the turmoil beneath. Before his mother died, he had promised her he would control his temper and use his considerable skills. He was a third-degree black belt and national junior Taekwondo champion in Chicago, only for protection. "I know, Dad," he replied, his voice steady, despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. The contrast between Elijah and his new surroundings was immediately apparent as he entered the school building. Westridge High oozed wealth and privilege from its manicured grounds to its state-of-the-art facilities. Students dressed in designer clothes clustered in clearly defined social groups, their eyes tracking Elijah's movement with undisguised curiosity. His simple jeans and plain button-down shirt marked him as an outsider before he spoke a word. His hand instinctively went to the small keychain hanging from his backpack, his mother's lucky charm that she had pressed into his palm during their final goodbye. The school's demographic makeup told its own story. Elijah quickly noticed he was one of very few black students in a sea of white faces. According to the welcome packet he'd received, minorities made up only 8% of the student body. His first-day observations confirmed what he had suspected: a rigid social hierarchy existed at Westridge, with racial divisions clearly, if unofficially, enforced. His interactions with teachers varied significantly. Miss Rivera, his English teacher, welcomed him warmly, offering genuine encouragement when he contributed thoughtful analysis to class discussion. Coach Brennan, on the other hand, gave him a dismissive once-over during physical education orientation, making assumptions about his athletic interests without asking. Principal Warren, a tall man with a politician's smile, was politely distant during their brief introduction, his welcome seeming more performative than sincere. Throughout the day, Elijah noticed subtle microaggressions that were all too familiar: a security guard following his movements in the hallway more closely than those of other students, a math teacher expressing surprise at his articulate answers to complex problems, classmates making automatic assumptions about his academic abilities, with one asking if he needed extra help with the advanced chemistry curriculum. During lunch period, a mixed-race girl named Zoe Washington approached his otherwise empty table. "You're the new kid," she stated matter-of-factly, setting her tray down across from him. At 16, Zoe carried herself with confident energy, a press badge from the school newspaper pinned to her denim jacket. "Elijah Wright, I'm Zoe, editor of the Westridge Chronicle." She offered basic orientation information, which hallways to avoid between classes, which teachers allowed late assignments, which cafeteria food was actually edible. As they spoke, Elijah noticed a group of students at a central table, watching their interaction with undisguised interest. At their center sat a tall, athletically built white student with carefully styled blonde hair and an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. "That's Blake Thompson," Zoe explained, following Elijah's gaze. "Senior wrestling champion and son of the school board president, basically runs the place." Blake's cold stare met Elijah's for a moment, before he turned to whisper something to his friends, prompting laughter and continued glances in Elijah's direction. Though Elijah couldn't hear the words, the sentiment was clear from Blake's predatory smile and the way his friends sized Elijah up with calculating expressions. "Fresh meat," Blake was saying. "This should be interesting." Elijah quickly learned that navigating Westridge's complex social landscape required more vigilance than mastering the intricate patterns of Taekwondo forms. By his first Friday, he had mapped the invisible but rigid boundaries that governed student interactions with Blake Thompson, firmly established at the apex of the power structure. Blake's position was reinforced by multiple pillars of privilege. As the only son of Richard Thompson, both school board president and the developer, responsible for half the luxury homes in Oakwood Heights, he enjoyed institutional protection that bordered on immunity. His athletic achievements, 3 consecutive state wrestling championships, earned him reverence from peers and faculty alike. His inner circle functioned as enforcers of the established order. Jason Reeves, a 4th-generation Westridge legacy student whose family name adorned the science building. Tyler Mitchell, quarterback of the football team with a college scholarship already secured. And Megan Fisher, head cheerleader, and Blake's girlfriend, whose calculated laughter signaled which social transgressions would be punished. Through whispered conversations in the library and cautious warnings in empty classrooms, Elijah pieced together Blake's history of targeting minority students. "Last year it was Jamal Winters," explained Marcus Wong, an academically focused Chinese-American student who had experienced his own share of Blake's attention before being dismissed as not worth the effort due to his family's financial connections. He was here on a music scholarship. Blake made his life hell until he transferred out mid-semester. Deshaun Jackson, one of the few other black students and a star basketball player, offered his own perspective between classes. "Look, I keep my head down, stick to sports. Don't make waves," he explained constantly, scanning the hallway as they spoke. "Blake leaves me alone mostly because Coach Peterson would lose it if his players got messed with. My advice, stay invisible." Aisha Patel, an Indian-American student council member, was more direct during their brief conversation in the science lab. "Thompson has a specific problem with students who don't know their place in his worldview," she said quietly. "Especially black students who excel academically or challenge the status quo. The administration looks the other way because his father threatens funding whenever complaints arise." While Elijah deliberately maintained a low profile, his academic performance inevitably drew attention. His analytical essay on Toni Morrison's Beloved earned Miss Rivera's enthusiastic praise. His elegant solution to a physics problem prompted Mr. Lawrence to announce to the class, "This is the kind of thinking that gets scholarships." Each academic achievement, rather than building connection with his peers, seemed to place a larger target on his back. Blake's attention shifted from casual observation to focused interest as teachers repeatedly held up Elijah's work as exemplary. Elijah maintained a disciplined routine despite the growing tension, rising at 5 every morning for intensive training in the basement gym. His father had established, complete with heavy bag practice mats and breaking boards. His pre-dawn ritual included an hour of physical training followed by 30 minutes of meditation, often focusing on memories of his mother, her strength through illness, her gentle insistence on excellence without arrogance, her belief that his abilities carried responsibility rather than privilege. The first minor incidents began as subtle provocations, Blake accidentally bumping Elijah's shoulder in the crowded hallway between classes. Books mysteriously knocked from his hands as Blake's friends passed. Whispered slurs just loud enough to be heard, but too quiet to be reported. Through each incident, Elijah maintained his composure, employing the breathing techniques and mental discipline honed through years of rigorous Taekwondo training. His seeming imperviousness to these tactics only intensified Blake's determination. During physical education, Coach Brennan announced upcoming athletic evaluations with his typical bravado. When he reached Elijah's name on the roster, he barely glanced up before commenting, "Basketball tryouts are next month. If you're interested," Carter making assumptions that drew snickers from several students. Elijah simply nodded politely, neither confirming interest nor revealing his true athletic background. Meanwhile, Zoe Washington's journalistic curiosity had fixed on Elijah as the subject for her feature on New Students. Her attempts to uncover his background in Chicago met with polite deflection as Elijah carefully avoided mentioning his competitive achievements or martial arts expertise. From across the cafeteria, Blake observed these interactions with growing irritation, his usual confident expression hardening into something more determined. "He thinks he's better than us," he muttered to his entourage eyes, never leaving Elijah's composed figure, acting all mysterious and superior. Time to teach him how Westridge works. 2 weeks after Elijah's arrival at Westridge High, Blake Thompson's campaign shifted from subtle undermining to overt harassment with calculated precision. During morning break, Elijah overheard Blake holding court in the hallway, his voice deliberately pitched to Carrie. "Yeah, he's from the South Side, you know," the ghetto Blake announced to a cluster of attentive students, though he had no actual knowledge of Elijah's Chicago neighborhood. "My dad says these diversity quota admissions are ruining Westridge's standards. Bet his dad's on welfare too, not a real professor." The rumors spread through the school's efficient social channels, with variations appearing on student social media accounts and whispered in classroom corners. The following morning, Elijah discovered his locker defaced with racial slurs scrawled in black marker. Before he could document the vandalism, the school custodian, an older black man who gave Elijah a look of resigned understanding, quickly wiped away the evidence, muttering, "Trust me, son, reporting just makes it worse." As Elijah stood watching the slurs disappear under the custodian's cloth, his mind flashed back to the training hall in Chicago, to Master Park's weathered face and calm voice, explaining the philosophy behind their discipline, the slam, calm. Strongest fighter is not the one who always strikes, but the one who knows when to strike. Patience is not weakness, it is strategic power. The memory steadied him, though maintaining his promise to his mother grew increasingly difficult as Blake's provocations multiplied. The harassment evolved into a comprehensive strategy of isolation study groups, mysteriously disbanded when Elijah arrived. Incorrect information about assignment due dates or classroom changes conveyed through seemingly helpful classmates. Lunch tables suddenly reserved when he approached with his tray. Each incident was designed to reinforce his outsider status while maintaining plausible deniability. Elijah found a momentary reprieve when he discovered the school's small martial arts club, which met twice weekly in the auxiliary gymnasium. Though he registered as a beginner to avoid attention, the club president Sophia Chen, a 16-year-old Chinese-American with regional tournament experience in Kung Fu, noticed his perfect stances and precision during basic exercises. "You've done this before," she commented quietly after watching him perform a beginner technique with flawless balance. "Your body doesn't forget proper training." Elijah offered a non-committal shrug, but a moment of understanding passed between them, the recognition of someone else who carried hidden depths beneath a careful surface. As Blake's campaign intensified, Zoe began witnessing the pattern of harassment firsthand. After observing several accidents that targeted Elijah, she approached him about writing a story on bullying culture at Westridge. "People should know what's happening," she insisted. As they sat in the library, her notebook already filled with observations and incident details, Elijah shook his head firmly. "Stories don't fix problems," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "They just create new targets." Miss Rivera had also noticed Elijah's increasing isolation, offering her classroom as a sanctuary during lunch periods when the cafeteria became too hostile. "My door is always open," she told him, with genuine concern. "And if you ever want to discuss what's happening, I'm required to report harassment." Elijah thanked her sincerely but maintained his silence. The situation escalated further when Richard Thompson visited the school for a board meeting, his imposing presence in an expensive suit drawing deferential treatment from administrators. Passing through the hallway, Elijah overheard him commenting to Principal Warren about changing neighborhood demographics and the need to maintain Westridge's traditional character, the coded language unmistakable in its intent. Meanwhile, Marcus Carter remained largely unaware of his son's school situation, absorbed in navigating his own challenges within the university's political landscape, where as one of few black professors in his department he faced his own forms of marginalization. Father and son shared meals and brief conversations, each protecting the other from their respective struggles. Though Elijah maintained perfect composure in public, the private strain began showing in subtle ways, his evening workouts growing in intensity until the basement walls vibrated with the impact of his kicks, broken practice boards accumulating in the trash, his knuckles increasingly calloused from hours on the heavy bag. His discipline remained intact, but the cost of that restraint grew heavier. Blake's frustration mounted in proportion to Elijah's continued calm. The lack of visible reaction to provocation challenged Blake's self-image as someone who could control others through intimidation. After a particularly unsuccessful attempt to provoke Elijah in English class, Blake gathered his friends in the locker room surrounding Elijah in a calculated display of physical dominance. The confrontation might have escalated had Coach Brennan not walked in his presence, temporarily postponing whatever Blake had planned. That evening, Blake met with his inner circle at his family's sprawling home. Their conversation focused entirely on the resistant new student who had unwittingly become a challenge to their established order. "If he won't break on his own," Blake concluded after rejecting several suggestions, "we'll make a spectacle he can't ignore." Do you believe silence is strength or surrender when facing harassment? Comment number 1. If you think Elijah's self-control shows remarkable strength in the face of racism. Comment number 2. If you think he should stand up for himself more directly against Blake's bullying. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone maintaining dignity despite unfair treatment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about resilience in difficult situations. How long can Elijah maintain his composure? What will happen when Blake escalates his attacks? And will anyone at Westridge stand up against the obvious racism? Stay with us as the tension builds and Elijah faces his greatest test yet. In this tension builds powerful story of hidden strength and courage. The Westridge High cafeteria buzzed with the usual lunchtime cacophony, hundreds of conversations overlapping with the clatter of trays and the squeak of chairs against linoleum, as Elijah Carter found his usual isolated spot at a corner table. He had developed a routine of arriving early to secure a seat facing the wall, minimizing his exposure while maximizing his awareness of approaches from behind. Today he had brought advanced theoretical physics from the library, its complex equations offering both intellectual stimulation and a shield against unwanted attention. The cafeteria had momentarily settled into the predictable rhythm of social segregation, athletes clustered near the center, academic achievers by the windows, band members near the exit, with invisible but rigid boundaries between groups. When Blake Thompson's deliberate trajectory toward Elijah's table created a ripple of anticipation across the room. Blake carried a large cup of steaming coffee from the teacher's lounge, a privilege extended to seniors with perfect attendance records. His approach was calculated for maximum visibility, his path cutting across the center of the cafeteria to ensure a substantial audience. Tyler and Jason flanked him at a slight distance, phones already positioned for recording. Conversations quieted as Blake reached Elijah's table, adopting a facade of casual friendliness that fooled no one. "Hey, Chicago," Blake said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, using the nickname he had created to emphasize Elijah's outsider status. "That physics stuff looks intense. You must be really smart to understand all those equations." Elijah glanced up briefly, nodded once in acknowledgement, and returned to his reading, his posture betraying neither hostility nor engagement. The minimal response clearly irritated Blake, whose smile tightened slightly as he continued the performance. "I've been meaning to ask about your old school," he pressed, shifting his coffee cup from hand to hand. "They have actual classrooms there, or did you just learn to dodge bullets?" Several nearby students snickered nervously, while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Elijah turned a page in his book, his expression unchanged, though his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Blake, frustrated by the lack of reaction, moved closer under the pretense of examining Elijah's book. Without warning, he executed his planned accident with theatrical precision, appearing to trip slightly while standing directly beside Elijah. The coffee cup tilted, then overturned, completely pouring its steaming contents over Elijah's head and shoulders. The hot liquid soaked through his shirt, instantly staining the pages of his book and puddling on the table. The cafeteria fell into shocked silence for 3 heartbeats before erupting into a chaos of reactions, gasps of genuine shock, uncomfortable laughter, the distinct sounds of phone cameras capturing the moment, and a few isolated voices of plaste. Protest quickly silenced by social pressure. "Oh man, I'm so sorry," Blake exclaimed with exaggerated concern that couldn't mask his satisfaction. "Didn't see you there." "You blend into the background, you know." The racial undertone was unmistakable, drawing more nervous laughter from those eager to remain in Blake's good graces. Throughout this calculated humiliation, Elijah remained eerily still, coffee dripping from his chin and soaking into his collar. The physical sensations registered with crystal clarity, the burning heat against his scalp, the acrid smell of coffee filling his nostrils, the sound of laughter surrounding him like a physical presence. Yet his expression revealed nothing. In his mind flashed a vivid memory, the national championship semifinals in Chicago last year, when his opponent had landed an illegal strike to his ribs that referees missed. Master Park's voice had cut through the pain. "Then, your reaction is your choice, not your opponent's." Elijah's hands rested on the table, fingers spread. Anyone watching closely would have noticed the progression knuckles whitening with tension, a slight tremor of restraint, and then deliberate relaxation as he exercised the control developed through thousands of hours of training. Slowly, with fluid dignity that silenced much of the laughter, Elijah rose to his full height. Coffee continued dripping from his clothes as he stood eye to eye with Blake, neither saying a word. Something in Elijah's direct gaze, not anger, but something deeper and more disconcerting, caused Blake to step back involuntarily. He had anticipated tears, shouting, or humiliated retreat responses he understood and could exploit further. This quiet intensity was outside his experience, and for the first time, uncertainty flashed across his confident expression. Without a word, Elijah turned and walked toward the exit, his deliberate pace neither hurried nor hesitant, leaving a trail of coffee droplets across the cafeteria floor. The controlled exit created an unsettling silence in his wake, broken only when he disappeared through the double doors. In the privacy of the bathroom, Elijah finally released a fraction of his tightly controlled emotion, driving his fist into a metal stall door with enough force to leave a visible dent in the painted surface. The momentary lapse lasted only seconds before he regained his composure, breathing deeply as he examined the red marks forming on his knuckles. The bathroom door opened, as Zoe entered with a stack of paper towels and a spare gym shirt, having witnessed the entire incident. She stopped short, seeing both the dented stall and the glimpse of Elijah's muscular physique as he removed his soaked shirt. Her expression registered surprise but not fear as she handed him the dry clothing. "That was assault, not an accident," she stated firmly. "We should report it." Elijah shook his head as he accepted the towels. "Reactions are what bullies want," he replied, methodically drying his hair. "I don't give what isn't earned." The incident spread through the school's social channels, with the speed unique to adolescent communications. Video clips circulated, accompanied by commentary that revealed the school's divided perspectives. Some found Blake's action hilarious and justified as establishing dominance. Others expressed uncomfortable recognition of the racial dynamics at play. A smaller faction voiced outright disapproval, though primarily in private messages rather than public comments. A sympathetic teacher provided Elijah with school gym clothes to replace his coffee-soaked attire and sent him to Principal Warren's office. The administrator's response proved as inadequate as Elijah had expected. Without clear proof of intent, Mr. Thompson's account of an accidental spill must be accepted. Perhaps you two simply got off on the wrong foot. No consequences were mentioned, no remediation suggested. By late afternoon, videos of the incident had migrated from school social groups to wider platforms, attracting comments that ranged from outraged support to explicitly racist attacks. When Elijah returned home that evening, his father immediately noticed his damp hair and the lingering coffee smell clinging to his skin despite a shower in the school's locker room. For the first time since arriving at Westridge, Elijah partially opened up about the difficulties he'd been facing, though he minimized both the severity and the racial component out of concern for adding to his father's burdens. Marcus Carter listened with growing concern before sharing his own experiences navigating racism in academia. Sometimes the fight isn't with fists, he advised his son, unaware of how literally Elijah could have applied those fists if he had chosen to. It's with excellence they can't ignore, and dignity they can't diminish. Later that night, with his father asleep upstairs, Elijah descended to the basement gym. In the dim light, he approached the practice dummy in the corner, its human-shaped form designed for targeting specific striking points. For nearly an hour, he unleashed a precisely controlled barrage of kicks and strikes that would have astonished his classmates with their power and technical perfection. Each movement executed with the discipline ingrained through years of training, yet carrying the emotional weight of the day's humiliation. As sweat soaked his t-shirt, he finally paused, breathing heavily, his mother's final words echoing in his mind. "Your power comes with responsibility, Elijah. Never let anyone make you forget who you really are." The aftermath of the coffee incident transformed the atmosphere around Elijah in ways both subtle and profound. The student body fractured into distinct reactions. Some now actively avoided him, creating wider berths in hallways, as though his composure carried contagious danger. Others offered quiet nods of acknowledgement or brief words of support when authority figures weren't watching. Most observed, from a distance, recalibrating their assessment of the mysterious transfer student who had remained standing while soaked in coffee, facing down the school's untouchable alpha without a word. Blake, emboldened by the lack of official consequences, viewed the incident as a successful demonstration of his power, already planning more elaborate humiliations to break through Elijah's unnerving calm. Unbeknownst to Blake, Zoe had begun investigating his history of targeting minority students, methodically interviewing former classmates, and reviewing past issues of the school newspaper. Her journalist's instinct recognized a pattern rather than isolated incidents, and her growing friendship with Elijah fueled her determination to document what administrators had consistently ignored. Her research uncovered disturbing consistency. 3 previous students had transferred after experiencing escalating harassment, similar to what Elijah was facing. Their departures quietly facilitated by administrative suggestions that perhaps Westridge isn't the right fit. The annual athletic evaluations arrived the following week, a full-day assessment where students were tested on various physical metrics that would inform team selections and physical education groupings. Coach Brennan approached the event with his characteristic blend of enthusiasm for top performers and dismissiveness toward those he deemed athletically unremarkable. "Just do your best to keep up, Carter," he advised Elijah, with patronizing encouragement as students gathered in the gymnasium. "Not everyone's built for sports." The evaluation began with standard tests, timed running strength assessments, agility drills, and flexibility measurements. For the first several stations, Elijah deliberately held back, performing at slightly above average levels that wouldn't draw particular attention. As the morning progressed, however, his competitive instincts began to emerge, his natural physical gifts increasingly difficult to disguise. At the vertical jump station, he initially recorded a respectable 28 inches, but when Blake's 32-inch jump drew Coach Brennan's enthusiastic praise, Elijah approached the measuring board again. His second attempt, a seemingly effortless leap that reached 41 inches, silenced the nearby students and drew Coach Brennan's immediate attention. "Do that again," the coach demanded, skepticism evident in his tone. Elijah complied with a jump that reached 42 inches, shattering the school record by a significant margin. The flexibility assessment produced similar results when Elijah demonstrated a full side split and contortions that exceeded the measurement tool's capacity. The speed and agility tests followed the same pattern, with Elijah breaking school records that had stood for decades. By midday, a crowd had gathered to watch his performance whispers spreading through the gymnasium as students and faculty alike struggled to reconcile the quiet, reserved student with the physical specimen now demonstrating extraordinary capabilities. Blake watched from the sidelines, his expression darkening with each new revelation of Elijah's abilities. When Coach Brennan pulled Elijah aside between tests, his previous condescension had transformed into hungry interest. "What sports background do you have?" he demanded already, calculating how these abilities could translate to team achievements under his coaching. Elijah's response remained characteristically minimal. "I've had some training." The coach might have pressed further, but a commotion near the bleachers drew everyone's attention. Kevin Zhang, known throughout the school for his encyclopedic knowledge of sports and compulsive internet research abilities, was frantically showing his phone to a growing circle of students. "It's him!" Kevin exclaimed, loudly enough for his voice to carry across the gymnasium. "Elijah Carter, junior national Taekwondo champion from Chicago, three-time gold medalist. Look." He thrust his phone toward the gathered crowd, displaying competition footage that was unmistakably Elijah performing complex kicking combinations against high-level opponents. The revelation spread through the school, with digital efficiency students passing phones back and forth to view competition highlights that had been uploaded to sports websites over the past 3 years. The cafeteria incident video, still circulating on social media, now took on entirely different significance as students realized what Elijah could have done in response to Blake's provocation. "He could have destroyed Thompson," one football player commented loudly enough for Blake to hear. "Black belt versus coffee pourer, no contest." Blake's humiliation manifested as defensive anger, his status threatened more by this revelation than by Elijah's non-reaction to the coffee incident. So what he proclaimed to his increasingly uncertain entourage: "Karate tournament trophies don't mean anything here. This is the real world, not some dojo with pajamas and bowing." After practice, Sophia Chen confronted Elijah in the otherwise empty martial arts club room, her expression a complex mixture of admiration and betrayal. "Why hide it?" she demanded, gesturing toward the competition videos still circulating on students' phones. "You're literally a champion." Elijah carefully wrapped athletic tape around his knuckles before responding, his focus on the precise application rather than Sophia's intensity. "The moment people know what I can do, they see me differently," he explained quietly. "Either afraid or wanting me to perform. Either way, I stop being a person and become a capability." The racial dimension remained unspoken, but understood between them how black physicality was often valued over black humanity. Athletic black bodies celebrated while black voices were silenced. The school administration's reaction to the revelation proved predictably self-serving. Principal Warren, who had dismissed the coffee incident as trivial, now appeared at the martial arts club practice with unprecedented interest. "Elijah," he began with newfound warmth, "we're so pleased to discover your remarkable talents. Westridge has a proud tradition of supporting elite athletes, and we'd be honored to have you represent the school at upcoming tournaments. I've already spoken with the district about competition sponsorship." Elijah continued his warm-up exercises without pausing. "I don't compete anymore," he stated simply. "That chapter is closed." The principal's smile faltered slightly before he pressed on. "Perhaps you might reconsider. Westridge could provide excellent opportunities, and achievements like yours would certainly strengthen college applications." Elijah merely shook his head, offering no further explanation. What remained unspoken was the true reason behind his withdrawal from competition. A championship match the previous year, where his opponent had used a racial slur during a clinch, triggering a momentary loss of Elijah's carefully maintained control. The resulting strike had seriously injured his opponent, leading Elijah to surrender the title and vow never to compete again, the guilt of his lapse in discipline outweighing the glory of potential championships. Zoe finally secured Elijah's agreement for an interview, though he established clear boundaries about which topics were acceptable. Their conversation in the empty journalism classroom revealed a growing connection between them, a mutual recognition of depth beyond the roles they presented to the world. People think physical strength is what makes someone powerful, Elijah explained during their discussion. But real power is in restraint, knowing what you could do, and choosing not to do it. As Elijah's reputation transformed from anonymous new student to hidden champion, Blake and his friends observed from a distance their previous dominance threatened by this unexpected revelation. During dinner that evening, in the Thompson family's ostentatious dining room, Richard Thompson noticed his son's uncharacteristic silence. "Something happened at school today," he inquired between bites of expensive steak. Blake hesitated before recounting the day's events and Elijah's revealed background. Richard's expression hardened as he listened. "Thompson men don't get shown up," he stated flatly, setting down his knife with deliberate precision. "Especially not by one of them. Handle it." The dynamics at Westridge High shifted like tectonic plates following the revelation of Elijah's martial arts background, creating new fault lines in the school's social geography. Students who had previously ignored his existence now watched his every movement in physical education class, whispering behind cupped hands when he performed even basic exercises. The newly attentive audience divided into distinct factions, those who responded with genuine respect for his discipline and achievements, others who resented the disruption to the established order, and a significant number who simply waited with morbid curiosity for the inevitable confrontation between the martial arts champion and the wrestling star, whose position at the apex of the social hierarchy now faced its first serious challenge. Blake's behavior transformed in response to this threat, his previous casual cruelty giving way to increasingly desperate attempts to reassert dominance. His usual confident swagger now carried a brittle edge as he moved through hallways where conversations suddenly paused at his approach, resuming with significant glances once he passed. The unspoken question hanging in the air whether Blake's wrestling prowess could stand against Elijah's Taekwondo expertise undermined the certainty of status that had defined Blake's entire high school experience. The situation reached its flashpoint during Thursday's lunch period, when Blake approached Elijah's table with theatrical confidence his followers arranged behind him like a Renaissance painting of a royal court. The cafeteria quieted as Blake placed his hands on the table, leaning forward into Elijah's space. "Let's settle this," he announced loudly enough for his voice to carry to the furthest tables. "Wrestling match. After school. My sport fair and square." The challenge, delivered with practiced casualness that barely masked his tension, created an immediate buzz throughout the cafeteria. Students pulled out phones to record, anticipating either acceptance or humiliation. Elijah looked up from his lunch with the same composed expression he had maintained through weeks of harassment. "I don't fight for entertainment," he replied, simply, his voice quiet but clear. The direct rejection of Blake's carefully staged challenge, visibly unbalanced, the wrestler, his practice script, suddenly useless. "Afraid you can't handle a real sport," Blake pressed, color rising in his face. "Or maybe all those karate trophies are just for show." When this failed to provoke a response, Blake's tactics escalated to territory he'd previously avoided in public settings. "Maybe your mom didn't teach you how to handle real competition before she checked out," he sneered, the deliberate cruelty drawing gasps from nearby tables. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed Elijah's face, a momentary tightening around the eyes, quickly controlled but noticed by everyone watching closely. Blake, sensing vulnerability, pressed his advantage. "That's it, isn't it? Mommy's not around to watch her little boy get beaten." The racial undertones that had previously been coded now emerged more explicitly as Blake's frustration mounted. "You people always talk big until you actually have to prove something." The cafeteria had fallen completely silent, the collective discomfort palpable as Blake crossed lines that even his most loyal supporters recognized as excessive. Zoe stepped forward from a nearby table, her expression fierce. "That's enough, Blake," she stated firmly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Blake turned on her with unexpected viciousness, shoving her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. "Stay out of this," he snarled. Nobody asked the half-breed's opinion. The movement was so fast that few observers could track it. One moment, Elijah remained seated the next. He stood beside Zoe, steadying her with one hand while facing Blake with an intensity that made several students step back, involuntarily. For a breathless moment, the entire cafeteria witnessed what Elijah's restraint had been containing the coiled power of a trained fighter whose every muscle communicated potential rather than kinetic energy. Blake, despite his bravado, took an instinctive step backward, his body recognizing the threat before his conscious mind could process it. The moment of tension stretched until Miss Rivera's authoritative voice cut through the silence. "That's quite enough," she announced, moving between the two students with deliberate calm. "Everyone back to lunch. Mr. Thompson, my classroom. Now—" As the confrontation dissolved under teacher intervention, Blake salvaged his pride by announcing loudly to his remaining audience, "He's afraid to face me." Everyone saw it. The narrative spread through the school with predictable distortions, Blake's supporters characterizing Elijah's refusal as cowardice, while others recognized the restraint it demonstrated. The pressure surrounding Elijah intensified from all directions. Students eagerly anticipating violence as entertainment teachers, sensing the building tension without addressing its causes. Blake's increasingly desperate attempts to provoke a response that would either prove Elijah's weakness or justify escalation. That evening, Elijah found unexpected solace in a lengthy conversation with his father, who noticed his son's unusual preoccupation during dinner. As they sat in their modest living room, Marcus Carter shared stories about his own grandfather's participation in civil rights protests, where strategic resistance had proven more effective than reactive violence. "Your great-grandfather used to say that dignity can't be taken, only surrendered." Marcus explained, unaware of how directly his words applied to his son's current struggle. The conversation created space for Elijah to confide more fully about the true reasons for their move from Chicago, not just his mother's death, but the incident during his final competition that had led to his vow to never again lose control. "I hurt someone, Dad," he admitted, the memory, still painful. "Really hurt him. All because he said something that made me angry. I promised Mom I'd never let that happen again." Marcus placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder, understanding the weight of that promise. "There's a difference between fighting for ego and standing your ground on principle," he offered gently. "Your mother never wanted you to become a victim. She wanted you to be thoughtful about your strength." The following morning, Blake executed his most calculated provocation yet. During passing period, when Elijah opened his locker, he found his mother's memorial keychain, the one possession he valued above all others, defaced with permanent marker, crude racial slurs covering the small photo she had placed inside it before her death. For the first time since arriving at Westridge, Elijah's control visibly slipped. His hand closed around the keychain with such force that his knuckles whitened and the locker door dented slightly under his other palm. The students nearest him stepped back instinctively, sensing the shift in his usually calm demeanor. Blake, watching from down the hallway, showed the first genuine fear beneath his bravado, suddenly confronting the reality of what he had deliberately provoked. The moment passed as quickly as it had appeared, Elijah's discipline reasserting itself with visible effort. He carefully placed the keychain in his pocket and closed the locker with controlled precision, his decision crystallizing in that moment of clarity. "If there must be a fight," he whispered to himself, "it will be on my terms, not his." Have you ever been pushed to your breaking point? Comment number 1, if you believe Elijah should accept Blake's challenge and put him in his place. Comment number 2, if you think he should continue taking the high road despite this cruel attack on his mother's memory. Hit that like button if you admire Elijah's incredible self-control in the face of such deliberate provocation, and subscribe to see how he'll finally respond to this crossing of the line. What would you do if someone defaced a precious memento of a loved one who passed away? Is there a point where standing your ground requires action rather than continued restraint? As Blake's cruelty reaches new heights, what unexpected path might Elijah choose that neither confronts nor surrenders? Stay with us as this powerful story reaches its turning point. The morning after the keychain incident, Elijah approached Blake in the parking lot before school started, deliberately choosing a moment when the senior was separated from his usual entourage. Blake tensed visibly at Elijah's approach, his hand tightening around his car keys in preparation for confrontation. Instead, Elijah spoke with the measured calm that had become his signature, though an undercurrent of new intensity ran beneath his words. "I have a counter-proposal," he stated, without preamble. "Instead of a private wrestling match, I suggest a public martial arts demonstration for charity. We both showcase our athletic abilities, charge admission, and donate the proceeds to cancer research in my mother's memory." Blake's expression shifted from wariness to confusion, then settled into dismissive scorn. "That's the coward's way out," he scoffed, though his relief was poorly disguised. "I challenged you to prove who's better, not put on some karate show." Elijah maintained steady eye contact, unmoved by the rejection. "Consider the options carefully," he continued, his voice level but firm. "A private fight settles nothing except our own egos. The winner claims bragging rights, the loser claims unfair conditions. Either way, it's meaningless." He paused before delivering the carefully calculated conclusion. "A public demonstration, however, allows everyone to judge our skills objectively. Unless, of course, you're concerned about how that comparison might turn out." The strategic framing of the choice placed Blake in precisely the dilemma Elijah had intended refusing would suggest fear, while accepting placed Blake in a competitive arena where Elijah's expertise far exceeded his own. Blake's frustration manifested in a tight-jawed silence before he grudgingly responded, "I'll think about it." By lunch period, Blake had consulted with his friends and arrived at what he believed was a clever modification. "Fine," he told Elijah with feigned magnanimity. "We'll do your charity show, but with a mixed demonstration, some Taekwondo, some wrestling, and a final sparring match combining both styles. That keeps it fair." His assumption that wrestling skills would neutralize Elijah's kicking techniques betrayed his fundamental misunderstanding of martial arts combat principles. But Elijah simply nodded his agreement, recognizing Blake's need to believe he had secured an advantage. The organization of the event gained unexpected momentum as word spread through the school. Principal Warren, initially hesitant about sanctioning any activity that might result in conflict, quickly recognized the publicity potential of a charity exhibition featuring 2 student athletes. "This is exactly the kind of community engagement Westridge values," he announced during their planning meeting, though his enthusiasm seemed directly proportional to the media attention he anticipated. The principal established clear parameters. Coach Brennan would supervise all activities. Participation forms would require parental signatures, and safety equipment would be mandatory for any contact demonstrations. With administrative approval secured, Elijah began training openly in the gymnasium after school hours, the space previously reserved for varsity teams now available for his preparation. The first afternoon, he practiced alone, executing complex kicking combinations and forms that showcased both power and precision. Word quickly spread, and by the second day, a small audience had gathered to watch in respectful silence as he moved through routines that transformed the familiar space into something almost sacred. Students who had previously known martial arts only through action movies witnessed the reality of disciplined training, the controlled breathing, the perfect balance, the economy of movement that made complex techniques appear effortless. Zoe's coverage in the school newspaper attracted attention beyond campus, with local media expressing interest in the event. Her article framed the demonstration as bridging cultural divides through athletic excellence, carefully avoiding explicit mention of the tensions that had necessitated such a bridge. Meanwhile, Blake was confronting the severity of his miscalculation. Despite his wrestling achievements, he recognized the gulf between his skills and Elijah's after watching video footage of previous Taekwondo championships. He began training frantically with his wrestling teammates, attempting to adapt his ground-fighting expertise to a standing combat format where it offered limited advantage. Blake's father, Richard Thompson, intervened after witnessing his son's increasing anxiety. "This isn't just about you anymore," he informed Blake during a tense conversation in their home gym. "It's about the Thompson name and reputation." The following day, A private coach appeared at Blake's training sessions, a former MMA fighter whose ethical reputation was as questionable as his technical expertise was undeniable. While Blake focused desperately on preventing humiliation, Elijah expanded the event's scope by inviting other marginalized students to join his demonstration. Sophia, from the martial arts club, immediately agreed, as did Deshaun, from the basketball team, who revealed he had studied karate as a child. Several other students with various levels of martial arts experience joined the impromptu team, creating a diverse group that practiced together after school. Elijah's coaching style revealed another dimension of his character as he patiently guided others with the same focused attention his own master had shown him. It's not about being the best, he explained during one session. It's about being your best self. The training sessions evolved beyond physical techniques to include the philosophical principles that formed martial arts' foundation: respect, discipline, perseverance, and integrity. For many participants, it was their first experience of belonging at Westridge without compromising their identity or dignity. Blake and his supporters attempted to sabotage the growing movement by accidentally damaging equipment during an unsupervised visit to the gymnasium, pouring water over practice mats, and breaking several boards intended for demonstrations. The incident, rather than undermining preparation, galvanized community support when Zoe's reporting on the vandalism prompted local martial arts schools to donate new equipment, transforming what would have been a modest exhibition into the scene, a properly equipped demonstration with professional-grade materials. Throughout the preparations, Zoe and Elijah's relationship deepened through shared purpose and mutual respect. Their conversations extended beyond the event to include dreams, fears, and experiences of navigating spaces where they never quite belonged. "My mother would have liked you," Elijah told her one evening as they finalized demonstration plans in the empty journalism classroom. "She believed in using your voice to change things, not just your fists." As the event date approached, Blake's desperation became increasingly evident. His father applied pressure through subtle reminders of family expectations and not-so-subtle implications about the consequences of public failure. "Thompson men don't lose" became a nightly refrain, each repetition adding weight to Blake's already considerable stress. Coach Brennan, recognizing Blake's disadvantage after watching both students train, suggested he consider withdrawing from the sparring portion. "There's no shame in focusing on your strengths," the coach advised with uncharacteristic gentleness. "The wrestling demonstration alone would be impressive." Blake refused with the determination of someone who could imagine no alternative to victory. "I'm not losing to him," he insisted, though not losing had gradually replaced winning in his stated objective. The night before the event, Elijah spent an hour in silent meditation in the basement gym, his mother's repaired keychain resting on the mat before him. He contemplated her teachings, his promise to her, and the purpose that had emerged from confronting Blake's harassment. For the first time since arriving at Westridge, he felt completely aligned with his true self, at peace with whatever outcome the following day might bring. As he completed his meditation, Elijah realized he had transcended his initial desire to prove Blake wrong. "The real victory isn't about who's better," he whispered to his mother's photo. "It's about showing a different way to be strong." Saturday morning transformed the Westridge Gymnasium from a utilitarian sports facility into something approaching a formal exhibition space. Volunteers from the art department had created banners bearing the event's name "Strength Through Discipline," a charity demonstration, and information about cancer research funding. Black gymnastics mats covered the center of the hardwood floor, surrounded by bleachers that began filling an hour before the scheduled start time. The unexpected turnout exceeded everyone's expectations, not only students and faculty, but parents, community members, and representatives from local media outlets claimed seats with an anticipation usually reserved for championship games. Elijah stood in the locker room, adjusting his traditional white dobok with its hard-earned black belt when his father entered. Marcus Carter had witnessed his son's tournament performances many times before, but his expression today carried a different quality, not just pride in athletic achievement, but deeper understanding of the principles being demonstrated. "I've been blind to what you've been facing here." Marcus acknowledged, placing a supportive hand on Elijah's shoulder. I was so caught up in my own challenges that I missed yours." Elijah shook his head. "We both did what we needed to do." Today isn't about Blake or what happened before. It's about showing who we really are. Blake arrived with a considerable entourage, including his private coach and father, whose commanding presence and expensive casual attire drew immediate attention. Richard Thompson immediately approached Principal Warren, engaged in an intense conversation that involved multiple gestures toward the event setup and several references to safety concerns and liability issues. The administrator's expression shifted from deferential to uncomfortable as Richard's demands escalated, particularly when he insisted on rule modifications that would clearly favor wrestling techniques over martial arts. The school's athletic director, a former college wrestler himself, but with enough professional integrity to recognize fairness, firmly rejected the proposed changes. The format was agreed upon by both participants, he stated, with uncharacteristic firmness toward the board president. Changing rules minutes before the event would violate that agreement. Richard Thompson's displeasure manifested in a tight-lipped withdrawal, his hand gripping his son's shoulder with visible tension as they moved toward the preparation area. Coach Brennan gathered all participants for final instructions, his usual bluster tempered by the event's unexpected significance. Remember, he emphasized looking directly at both Elijah and Blake, "This is a demonstration, not a competition. Safety comes first." He outlined the format: individual and group demonstrations of various martial arts techniques, followed by Blake's wrestling exhibition, concluding with a light contact sparring session between the two featured athletes. Sophia led Elijah's diverse team onto the mat for the opening ceremony. Their entrance met with enthusiastic applause that seemed to surprise them as much as anyone else. The demonstration began with fundamental techniques performed in synchronization, showcasing the discipline and precision that formed martial arts' foundation. Even casual observers could appreciate the hours of practice evidenced in their movements. The program progressed to more advanced demonstrations, with each participant highlighting their particular strengths. Deshaun revealed unexpected grace in a complex kata, while Sophia's weapons demonstration with traditional fans drew appreciative gasps. Throughout, Elijah moved among his teammates, offering quiet guidance and encouragement, his leadership style as much about elevating others as demonstrating his own expertise. When Elijah's solo demonstration finally arrived, the gymnasium fell into expectant silence. He began with traditional forms that emphasized the art's meditative aspects, his movements flowing with controlled power. Gradually, the demonstration intensified to include breaking techniques where boards shattered under precisely delivered kicks and acrobatic combinations that transformed martial arts into athletic artistry. The technical mastery was undeniable, but what captivated the audience most was the focused tranquility in his expression: power without aggression, strength without dominance. Blake watched from the sidelines, the realization of the skill disparity between them impossible to ignore. His wrestling demonstration followed, and to his credit, Blake performed impressively within his discipline. His takedowns were technically sound, his control on the mat demonstrated years of dedicated training, and his strength was evident in every movement. Yet even observers with limited knowledge could sense the fundamental difference between their performances. Blake's excellence was constructed through effort and determination, while Elijah's seemed to emerge from something deeper, a integration of physical and spiritual discipline that transcended mere technique. As the sparring portion approached, Blake's private coach delivered last-minute instructions in urgent whispers. "He can't kick effectively in close range," the coach emphasized. "Get inside his defense quickly, then use your wrestling. Find his weakness and exploit it." Blake nodded tensely, his earlier confidence replaced by grim determination. Elijah and Blake approached the center mat, bowed to each other with appropriate formality, and began the light contact sparring demonstration. For the first minute, both adhered to the agreed-upon parameters, controlled techniques with minimal contact, showcasing skill rather than seeking dominance. Blake moved with surprising speed for his size, attempting to close distance, as his coach had advised. Elijah maintained proper spacing through footwork that seemed effortless, demonstrating defensive principles while acknowledging Blake's attempts with respectful nods when they showed particular skill. The demonstration's cooperative nature began dissolving when Blake, frustrated by his inability to penetrate Elijah's defenses, escalated to nearly full contact strikes. A punch that should have been pulled stopped just short of Elijah's face when he shifted slightly, the intended message clear to everyone watching. Coach Brennan called out a warning from the sidelines, but the demonstration continued with noticeably increased intensity. Elijah adjusted to Blake's aggression without matching it, redirecting attacks, rather than countering them his defensive excellence, making Blake's increasingly forceful attempts appear clumsy by contrast. The frustration building in Blake manifested in his expression and breathing, the controlled competition face of an experienced athlete giving way to something more personal and desperate. "Stand and fight," Blake muttered during a clinch quiet enough that only Elijah could hear. "Or are you afraid like your mother?" The racial slur that followed, whispered against Elijah's ear, tested his control more severely than any physical attack could have. For a fraction of a second, Elijah's perfect composure wavered, his body instinctively preparing a counter that would have ended the match definitively. The gymnasium seemed to hold its collective breath, those closest to the action sensing the momentary shift in energy. Instead of delivering the devastating technique his training made available, Elijah executed a minimal defensive movement, creating space without causing harm. Blake, overcommitted to his failed provocation, lost balance and fell awkwardly, his ankle twisting beneath him with an audible sound that made spectators wince in sympathy. The demonstration ended abruptly, as Blake lay on the mat clutching his injured ankle with one hand while pointing accusingly at Elijah with the other. "You did this on purpose," he shouted, his face flushed with pain and humiliation. "He tripped me." The audience reaction split between concern for the injury and disappointment at the anticlimactic conclusion. Medical volunteers rushed forward as Elijah stood quietly, his expression betraying nothing of the internal conflict he had just navigated. When he extended his hand to help Blake up, a traditional gesture of respect between martial artists, Blake slapped it away with naked hostility. Richard Thompson pushed through the gathering crowd, his commanding presence parting volunteers and students alike. "This was deliberately negligent," he announced loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear. "The school will be hearing from our attorney." He pointed directly at Elijah. "That was an illegal move in any martial art. My son could have a career-ending injury because of this thug." The racial coding was obvious to many present, creating uncomfortable murmurs throughout the gymnasium. Before the situation could escalate further, the technical director approached with a tablet displaying video from multiple angles. "Sir, you might want to see this before making accusations," he suggested quietly. The footage clearly showed Blake's rule violations throughout the sparring, contrasted with Elijah's consistent restraint. Most damning was the final sequence, where Blake's loss of balance resulted from his own overextension rather than any action on Elijah's part. Richard Thompson's face darkened as he watched, but the presence of witnesses prevented further accusations. Medical assessment determined that Blake had suffered a moderate ankle sprain rather than the catastrophic injury initially claimed. He left the gymnasium on crutches, supported by teammates, but refusing to meet anyone's eyes, his father's hand on his shoulder, communicating tension rather than comfort. Despite the controversial ending, the event concluded with the announcement of the fundraising total, nearly $5,000 for cancer research, far exceeding the original goal. Principal Warren, quick to distance the school from the Thompson family's accusations, praised the exemplary sportsmanship and charitable spirit demonstrated by the participants, particularly highlighting the diverse student involvement Elijah had facilitated. As the crowd dispersed, Elijah remained on the mat, removing his belt and folding it with ceremonial precision. His expression revealed the complexity of his victory, not in defeating Blake, which had never been his objective, but in maintaining the principles that defined him despite extreme provocation. He had faced his greatest test, not in physical combat, but in the internal struggle between justified retaliation and chosen restraint. The quiet dignity with which he had navigated that challenge spoke more powerfully than any technique he had demonstrated. As he prepared to leave, Blake's final glare from the doorway carried a clear message beneath the humiliation: "This isn't over." Monday morning arrived with the peculiar energy that follows significant school events, the shared experience, creating a temporary community among the typically fragmented student body. Elijah entered Westridge High to find the atmosphere fundamentally altered from his first days. Students who had previously ignored his existence now offered greetings or acknowledging nods. Even those who had actively participated in his isolation seemed to reassess their positions, the demonstration having revealed dimensions of character that transcended simple athletic prowess. Blake's absence created a power vacuum that manifested in subtle reconfigurations of social groupings, his inner circle temporarily directionless without their center. Rumors circulated about Richard Thompson's threats against the school, ranging from plausible legal actions to unlikely scenarios involving the entire physical education department's termination. The videos from Saturday's event had spread far beyond the local community, with several clips reaching viral status on social media platforms. Comments highlighted both Elijah's extraordinary skills and the remarkable restraint he had shown during Blake's increasingly aggressive attempts. Even casual observers noted the contrast between technical excellence and ethical application, many expressing appreciation for martial arts as something deeper than competitive fighting. Local news coverage featured the charity aspect, prominently generating additional donations that more than doubled the initial amount raised. Reporters who had attended primarily for sports coverage found themselves writing about themes of discipline, respect, and community building instead. Principal Warren, quick to recognize the positive publicity, approached Elijah between morning classes with uncharacteristic warmth. The board is extremely impressed with Saturday's event, he announced, conveniently omitting mention of Richard Thompson's opposition. We're considering establishing a permanent martial arts program at Westridge. Your leadership would be invaluable in its development. Elijah received the offer with polite acknowledgement, but established clear conditions for his involvement. Any program would need to emphasize discipline, respect, and anti-bullying principles, not just physical techniques. The principal's enthusiastic agreement suggested either genuine alignment with these values or more likely recognition of their public relations benefits. Throughout the day, students who had previously suffered Blake's targeted harassment approached Elijah, sharing stories they had kept silent for fear of retaliation. Their experiences revealed a pattern of systematic intimidation that extended beyond individual incidents to create a culture of acceptance around discriminatory behavior. These conversations affected Elijah more deeply than the praise for his athletic achievements, reinforcing his growing understanding that his presence at Westridge served purposes beyond his individual journey. Zoe's comprehensive article appeared in both the school newspaper and local publications, its thoughtful analysis extending beyond the demonstration itself to examine broader issues. Titled, "Beyond Physical Strength, the Power of Restraint." The piece connected Elijah's experience to larger questions about response to aggression, particularly in contexts where racial dynamics complicated every interaction. Without explicitly mentioning Blake's harassment, she documented the challenges faced by minority students in predominantly white institutions and the different standards by which their reactions were judged. Blake returned to school the following week, his physical injury requiring crutches while his social status underwent its own rehabilitation. Though no longer the untouchable figure he had been, the infrastructure of privilege remained partially intact, supported by family connections and years of established hierarchy. The most noticeable change appeared in his demeanor, the confident swagger replaced by subdued movement, his typically commanding presence diminished by both physical limitation and public humiliation. The expected continuation of hostilities between Blake and Elijah never materialized. Instead, an unexpected development shifted focus from personal conflict to institutional accountability. Anonymous sources provided the school newspaper with documentation of a pattern of administrative negligence regarding bullying complaints, particularly those involving Richard Thompson's son. Evidence suggested that multiple formal reports had been deliberately misplaced or reclassified to avoid addressing behavioral issues that might threaten donations from prominent families. The resulting controversy forced a school board investigation, with Richard Thompson required to recuse himself due to clear conflicts of interest. External evaluators documented significant failures in the school's harassment policies and implementation with recommendations for systematic reforms. The most unexpected moment in the aftermath came 3 weeks after the demonstration when Blake approached Elijah in the otherwise empty weight room after school. Their interaction carried neither the easy resolution of movie reconciliations nor the continued hostility that might have been expected. Instead, it occupied the complex middle ground of real human growth, tentative, incomplete, but genuine. "My coach taught me that illegal move," Blake admitted without preamble, adjusting his weight on his healing ankle. "Said it was the only way to put you in your place." The acknowledgement wasn't quite an apology, but it represented more honesty than Elijah had expected. "You could have destroyed me that day," Blake continued, discomfort evident in his posture but pushing through it. "Everyone who knows anything about martial arts saw it. You had the opening and you didn't take it." Elijah continued his stretching routine without interruption. "Hurting you wouldn't have solved anything," he replied simply. Blake seemed to struggle with concepts outside his usual framework of dominance and submission. "So what now? We become friends and sing Kumbaya." The defensive sarcasm barely masked genuine uncertainty about how to proceed. Elijah stood meeting Blake's eyes directly. "Your next choices define you, not your past ones," he stated, without condemnation or absolution, offering neither the friendship Blake hadn't earned nor the continued enmity he perhaps expected. "That's up to you." The martial arts program began the following month with unexpectedly diverse participation. Students who had never found their place in traditional sports discovered community in an activity that valued individual progress over innate athletic gifts. Elijah found himself in an unexpected role as assistant instructor, translating his technical knowledge into teaching that emphasized personal growth alongside physical skills. His approach integrated the wisdom his master had imparted in Chicago, adapted for the specific challenges his classmates faced. "True strength begins with understanding yourself," he explained during an early session. "Not just your physical capabilities, but your emotions, your reactions, your choices." Miss Rivera organized a school-wide discussion on racial bias and bullying, creating structured dialogue around issues that had previously festered beneath the surface. Though some faculty resisted acknowledging systemic problems, the conversation initiated changes that extended beyond temporary awareness to policy reforms with meaningful enforcement mechanisms. For Elijah and his father, these weeks brought healing to their relationship as well. Marcus Carter attended several of Elijah's teaching sessions, witnessing his son's emerging leadership with undisguised pride. "Your mother would be amazed by the man you're becoming," he told Elijah, during a rare evening when both had time to share dinner without pressing obligations. "Not just because of what you can do, but because of who you choose to be." The following weekend, they visited Elijah's mother's grave together, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. In the privacy of that sacred space, Elijah finally allowed himself the emotional release he had carefully controlled for months. The tears came not from sadness alone, but from the complex mixture of grief, growth, and gradual acceptance that constitutes true healing. As spring advanced, Elijah received an unexpected invitation to return to competitive martial arts through a regional tournament, specifically focused on technical excellence rather than combat. The decision remained open-ended, but conversations with his father and friends suggested a growing openness to reclaiming that aspect of his identity with a new perspective informed by his experiences at Westridge. The most significant measure of transformation became apparent the following semester when a new student arrived at Westridge, David Alvarez, a Latino freshman whose uncertain expression and deliberate attempts at invisibility reminded Elijah of his own first days. When several of Blake's former associates began their familiar pattern of targeted harassment during lunch, something remarkable happened. Elijah rose from his now populated table, but he didn't stand alone. Sophia, Deshawn, Zoe, and a diverse group of students from the martial arts program moved as a unified community, surrounding David with protective welcome rather than confrontational defense. "Welcome to Westridge," Elijah said, extending his hand to the new student while the would-be harassers retreated in the face of collective response. Things work differently here now. The transformation extended beyond individual relationships to the systems that had enabled discrimination. Though imperfect and ongoing, the change represented what Elijah had come to understand as true strength, not the power to defeat others in physical combat, but the capacity to transform environments through principled action and collective responsibility. The quiet black student who had once stood motionless as coffee soaked through his clothes had revealed that genuine power often lies in restraint, and that the most important victories aren't won through domination, but through domination to changing the conditions that make domination possible. Have you ever witnessed someone transform a negative situation into positive change like Elijah did? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story of hidden strength and dignity in the face of discrimination resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it too. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that explore important social issues through compelling narratives. Share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that true strength often lies in restraint rather than reaction. Thank you for joining us on Elijah's journey from targeted outsider to community builder. Remember that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't fighting back, but standing firm in your principles and creating the change you wish to see. Elijah's journey teaches us powerful truths about strength, dignity, and transforming unjust systems. True power isn't measured by physical dominance, but by self-mastery and the courage to stand firm in your principles, even when faced with humiliation. Elijah could have easily overpowered Blake physically, but he chose the more difficult path of restraint. The story reveals how racial discrimination often operates in institutions that claim neutrality, but actually maintain hierarchies through selective enforcement of rules. Blake's behavior continued because the school system protected him, showing that racism requires systems of support to persist. We learn that meaningful change rarely comes from single confrontations, but through consistent demonstration of alternative ways to exercise power. By creating a martial arts program emphasizing respect and inclusion, Elijah transformed the school culture more effectively than any fight could have. Perhaps most importantly, this story illustrates that dignity cannot be taken only surrendered. Despite continued provocations, Elijah never allowed others to define his worth or identity. His refusal to react as expected disrupted the cycle of dominance and submission that bullying depends on. Finally, we see that creating community is the most powerful response to isolation. By bringing together other marginalized students, Elijah built a collective strength that ultimately changed Westridge High's culture from within. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between standing up for yourself and taking the higher road? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone facing similar challenges today. If you found inspiration in Elijah's remarkable self-control and his commitment to changing his school rather than just defeating his bully, hit that like button to help more people discover this powerful message. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore important social issues through compelling narratives about everyday heroes who transform their communities. And please, share this video with someone who might be struggling with bullying or discrimination. It could be exactly what they need to hear right now. Thank you for joining us on this journey of dignity, restraint, and positive transformation. Remember that sometimes the greatest strength is shown not in how hard you can hit, but in knowing when not to strike at all.